Hello and happy Halloween. My voice may sound a bit weird because I'm sick, but well, what can you do? October might be over, but my Inktober is not. I think my love for all things horror will continue on because today I also have a spooky real life story so you can enjoy while you watch the speed paint process. And if you like the stories and the drawing, then please subscribe. I have so many ghost stories to tell you, so you don't want to miss out on them. Now, without further ado, let's begin our first story. Have you ever asked yourself what you'd do if one day you wake up and find yourself in a completely unknown place? You don't know where you are, how you even got there, and worse, you can't even remember your own name or your address for that matter. Surely that would chill you to your bone. Well, the same experience happened to a man named Matthew. Matthew recounts a very strange account, which is, quite frankly, very mind boggling as well. It is so strange that some might even say that it is a made up story. But I'd let you decide that. Matthew, 32 years old, found a new hobby of running. He had always been very athletic, being in various sports teams throughout his high school and college. He was introduced to a run club by one of his friends in the beginning of summer 2013. So Matthew joined this local run club, which is a real small community of people. There may have been 20 people at most in the club. They'd all meet at a designated park every Saturday early in the morning. They'd run around the park in lapses and then proceed along a trail which he describes as scenic and beautiful. So I am imagining a hiking trail into luscious green nature. They'd all set personal running goals like 1 mile, 2 mile, and so on, depending on their experience and energy, of course. Sometimes people with similar running goals would form a group and venture into the wilderness of nature, meaning they'd go off the regular trail and explore other parts of the place. Matthew was a newcomer and he was beginning to make a lot of friends in the run club. He suddenly found that he had a whole new set of people with whom he shared values and beliefs, and soon he was looking forward to their run club sessions each weekend. It became like a lovely ritual for him, and he'd make sure to never stay up later than 9 p.m. just so he could get up on Saturday on time and not miss it. Even when he went to parties on Fridays, he'd excuse himself early and leave. That kind of made his social life not so happening because he was always declining invitations for parties and outings, but it did not bother him at all. He was more than happy to give up these habits and prioritize his new hobby. Now, skip forward a few months, and now it's August. His run goals have become 5 miles now, and he is in the best shape he's ever been. Also, he's very happy. 5 miles was a little excessive, he thought, because most people didn't want to tag along with him. Most people didn't set as high a goal as him, but that was fine too. One Saturday morning, and we're still in August, Matthew wakes up on time and goes to the run club. He noticed that today there were fewer people around. His run partner was also not there, and he checked to see that he had left a text saying he wouldn't be joining today because of some work. So Matthew, as usual, says hi hellos to others, chats up a bit about this and that while they warm up and run around the park. Then he sets off towards their hiking trail. Around the 2 mile mark, he noticed that there was only him and two others behind him. He was on the lead and he had his headphones on and he focused on running. Then, after some time, one of them tapped him on the shoulder and told him that they were going back and whether he'd like to come back with them. He said no because he still had a couple of miles to cover. So they said their goodbyes and he went ahead. And he kind of lost his sense of time and even his direction. He says that he ran around exploring unusual trails among tall trees and thick bushes, and he was not paying attention to anything in particular, just kind of going through the motions and letting his mind go blank. Matthew had no idea how long he was doing that, but he was suddenly startled back to reality when he saw a figure pass by from the corner of his eyes. That's when he unplugged his headphones and finally took the time to look around. This was definitely an unknown trail. It was more thick in terms of foliage, and he could see more birds and squirrels around than usual. He then again heard a rustle and turned around. He knew that this place would not be visited by many despite being in broad daylight, and chances were he was alone. Or at least he should be. He hardly ever saw anyone around. Then he noticed that there was a man, a little short, a little chubby, partially bald head, face red with sweat, and glasses on top of his rounded nose, covering small eyes. He looked pretty harmless, so Matthew just nodded once. The man saw him and smiled and said hello. He seemed a bit out of breath and agitated, and Matthew was probably looking the same after running for so long, so he was the last person to judge the guy. The man approached him and said, hello, can you help me? I seem to have lost my way. He had a very mild way of talking, even timid, like a kid who's been in detention and he was answering to a really angry and scary teacher. Matthew said that, of course, he was going to go back now anyway, so the man can follow him out. This brought a timid smile on the man's face, and they began going back out. The trail was a little rough, Matthew had to admit, and more than a couple times he saw the man huffing and puffing as he tripped over some thick tree root or a rock. He was very flustered every time it happened and weakly smiled at him as if feeling extremely guilty for something so common for someone who's not familiar with the place. Matthew felt really sorry for him. This type of behavior doesn't come unless someone has had a really hard life, probably a childhood with a lot of trauma. So he did his best to talk to him and ease him up a bit, which worked, and the man revealed that his name was Harry and that he's recently moved here. But when Matthew asked him how he came about this trail and how he kind of lost his way, he became very quiet, as if he was upset at being asked and did not want to talk about it. Matthew thought it better to leave it, and they walked along in silence for a long time when suddenly Matthew noticed that their surroundings had gone very quiet and also very dark, darker than what it should be at about 8 or 9 in the morning on a sunny day. This type of unusual weather changes were not common where he lived, so he was pretty surprised to see it. He mentioned it to the man, saying, "Looks like it's going to rain. We better hurry up." The man suddenly glared at him, all angry and fuming, and almost shouted at him, "I'm doing my best. Can't you see? I'm literally running to keep up with you." Matthew was shocked at the sudden outburst and slowed down immediately. He wasn't sure what he had said was so offensive to get that type of reaction. But before he could say anything, the man continued to yell at him with a red face and burning eyes. He was shouting, "You people never think I'm good enough. Just because you're tall and fit doesn't mean you can boss me around. All of you are the same. All of you are selfish and pathetic, and you love to make others miserable so that you can feel good about your shitty life. You're the pathetic one. You're the miserable one." Matthew was so taken aback that he had no idea what to say or do. Then, all of a sudden, the man bent down, picked up a fist-sized stone, and hit him straight on the head. His vision went white and then black instantly, and he knew his skull had cracked because he could feel the blood rush out and drip down his face. And the pain that accompanied it was unbearable. It made him cry. When he opened his eyes next, he was in a hospital. His head was tightly wrapped with bandages, and his whole body was numb and weak, which could only mean that he'd been given way too much pain relief medication. The police came afterwards to take his statement because it did look like he was attacked. It was someone random who had found his body unconscious and injured, who was walking along the trail and had called the ambulance and also the cops. He told everything to the cops, and they also confirmed that they had found the stone which was used to injure him, but they could not find the perpetrator. But now that they had a name and a clear visual description of the man, it would be easy to find him. 3 months pass by. The cops give up. The man cannot be traced. He's probably fled or hid. Matthew was sent home after 1 week of hospitalization. He resumes his old life bit by bit. It's more difficult at first because he's getting headaches quite often now. His vision has suffered quite a bit as well. He still encounters spells of disorientation, but he believes that he's going to get better. He is getting better. Until one day, he decides to join the run club again. He sets a small goal, runs laps with his friends, and then suddenly his head starts throbbing. The headache is so intense that his vision becomes blurry and he can barely keep his eyes open. He excuses himself and makes his way home. But he never reaches it. Who knew what happened? But when he opened his eyes, he was laying in the woods. The sky above him was an inky blue color. He hears leaves rustling in the wind, the smell of dried autumn leaves fill his nose, and he has absolutely no idea where he is. He sits up and tries very hard to remember, but he is absolutely disoriented to find that he cannot remember anything at all. Even remembering his own name becomes a task too difficult for him. But what he did remember, however, was the face of a man, partially bald, chubby cheeks, a rounded nose, and small eyes behind glasses. Harry, he ventured in his mind. Even though he could not remember his own name or where he'd come from, it came naturally to him that the man's name was Harry and that he talked in a mild way unless he got angry, and then he'd shout and yell and break his head. Matthew blinked into the darkness, confused and somewhat terrified. He got up and wandered around, trying and failing again and again to find the trail that would lead him out. All his memories of the place seemed to have evaporated. Then he saw that man again, and this time it was not in his head. No, the man was right there. He smiled and with the same mild tone asked if he was lost and wanted help. Matthew could not find it in himself to refuse, as if he was compelled to feel towards him a sense of trust. A trust for a man who not too long ago had cracked his head open. The man beckoned him to follow behind him, and so he did. After a moment he asked the man if he knew what his name was. The man said, Matthew. He asked, Where is this place? Where do I live? I cannot remember anything. The man told him the name of the town and even his home address. None of them sounded familiar to his ears, but he trusted the man. Then he felt somewhat confused and asked, Why was I here? The man kept on walking ahead of him and never turned around. He answered, Because I wanted to see if you'd remember me. This sounded very strange, so Matthew asked, Why? The man said, People don't remember me. Matthew had no idea what that meant, but the man refused to elaborate on it no matter how many times he asked. And then he was standing at the start of the trail and noticed that the man had stopped. He asked him if he wasn't going to go home, but the man simply said that he will not. Then he turned around and disappeared among the trees. And as soon as he vanished from his sight, Matthew's head filled with every piece of memory he had forgotten, everything he was trying to remember for so long. He was terrified to realize that the man who had attacked him just led him out of the woods. He called the cops and told them everything. They pursued the lead, and after a thorough search, they still couldn't find the man. The cop advised him to stay at home and not go out because it could be a case of psychopathic crime. But not long after, the same thing happened again. Again he was in the woods at night with no memories of anything, and then that man appeared and led him out. As soon as he vanished, all the memories flooded to him. Matthew was so frightened that he immediately called the cops again, but this time he was not believed so easily. They advised him to consult doctors, and maybe his head injury was causing him to hallucinate. So he did. He made the appointments, got his MRI, and everything was normal. His head was fine. He explained everything, and he was sent to a psychologist who specializes in PTSD. But nothing truly helped. He would find himself devoid of all memories, and with the same man every time leading him out. He was frightened for his life and for his well-being, and he was starting to lose touch with reality. It affected his life severely, and he was absolutely devastated. On the 1-year mark of these events, Matthew decides that this was ridiculous. He could not take it anymore, and he went to the place where he'd frequently find himself waking up without his memories. It was extremely difficult to find, but when he did, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine, as if someone was there beside him. As if any moment now that man would jump out from behind a tree and bash his head with a stone. With shivering steps, he retraced the route he'd so often been led through, and throughout that time he couldn't shake this uncomfortable feeling of being watched. Then he saw it, the top of a partially bald head, and froze on the spot. The man came a bit closer, now revealing his face and shoulders, and then pointed to a spot ahead. He looked a bit thinner than before, his eyes a little bit darker and dim, and then he simply vanished as he did so often. Instantly, the feeling of being watched lifted like a veil. Then, with frightened steps, Matthew went to the place towards where he was pointed. He looked around, finding nothing worthwhile. He was about to return when suddenly he caught sight of something on the ground. As he looked closely, he gasped and realized these were the same glasses the man wears. He immediately called the cops and explained everything as best as he could. He was not taken seriously at first, but after much pleading, the cops finally searched the area, and then a skeleton was discovered, same height as that of the man, wearing the same clothes as the day Matthew had been attacked. It was concluded that the man had died that day and went unnoticed for a whole year. His identification card was still in his pockets, and they were able to notify the family. The man was apparently suffering from mental issues, having a prior history of abuse as a child. He had moved away from his family to start a new life a little over a year ago, and then no one in his family could contact him anymore. The missing person report they had registered was never resolved. Well, until now. The cause of the death could not be determined either. It was the most horrifying experience of Matthew's life, knowing that the man was probably mentally disturbed and did not actually mean to hurt him in the first place. He might have been too frightened and died in the woods where he was hiding from the cops. He was also scared to think that for a whole year he had seen and talked to a man who was long gone. After finding his body, though, Matthew received a miraculous recovery, never having a memory loss afterwards, never another episode like that. So he thinks that perhaps all this time the man was trying to get him to notice his dead body. In the end, he was lost, and he wanted someone to find him.